Good morning, good morning. Just have to wait for the live catch up really fast. This morning, I just wanted to give you a brief demonstration on my tortillas and my taco bowls. The taco bowls recently made it onto my blog, and the tortillas have been on there for a little while. It's the same exact recipe, which is why it's my favorite. Now, one of the things starting out is that these tortillas can be a little tricky to make at first, but once you make them a couple of times, it gets easier and easier, and I seriously cannot stop eating them. I probably make them every day. So I've gotten to be an expert enough that I can show you a demonstration. And and jump on the comments, say hi, tell me where you're from. And if you have any questions at all, I'll be checking that periodically. I've also got my husband with his eyes on it, so we can answer any questions or comments that you have. Okay, so just starting out, you're going to take 1 cup of cassava flour, and I have this all pre-measured out, and you're just going to put it kind of just in a medium large bowl. And then you're also going to take this salt, which is a ½ teaspoon of salt, and combine that together. Now you can use a whisk or you can use a fork to combine these really fast. I just use a fork because it's what I'm comfortable with. And I've used a whisk before, and that's great. I really like to use a whisk on things that are clumpy, like almond flour is a little bit clumpy, and so is tiger nut. So that's the cassava plus the salt. And then you will measure in 7 tablespoons of water, which is really just 1/3 of a cup plus 1 tablespoon. And then you'll also measure in 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Let that drip out really fast. And then I'm just going to mix this together just a little bit. It's not going to totally mix with just the fork. I'm going to have to get my hands in there and get a little bit messy. Okay, so the great and awesome thing about cassava is that it makes perfect tortillas. The bad thing is too much water and it's going to be too sticky, too little water and it's going to crack all over the place. And there really is just a seriously fine line between the two. So anyways, you can see that I'm mixing this together, and to me this is feeling just about right. Even the funny thing is, even if you have like a teaspoon extra of cassava flour, you might end up with it being too dry. And if you leave it sitting on the counter for too long, they might end up being too dry. So it's all a matter of just playing with it, adding a little bit more water. So I'm just gonna get really serious in here. And it takes a little bit of kneading it to get it together. It's the pressing together that really helps it stick. And this is just about right. So let me show you what it looks like when it's wrong. So I took the, just what hadn't been mixed in with the water. If I push it and press it together, and actually this is perfect. So if it comes apart and it doesn't have a lot of crumblies, it shouldn't be too seriously dry on the inside, just wet enough. You can see down here at the bottom I have all of these that aren't combined. So here's what it looks like when it's wrong. So it just is pretty crumbly. And now I've got all this extra stuff in the bottom that's just not combining as well as I would like it to. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more water. Just a teeny tiny bit. It also depends on the weather for the day. If it's humid out, then these normally stick together just fine with what I have. So I'm just going to start with just a little teaspoon and just add a little in. Just a little on the dry side. Don't be afraid to mess around with it. Like I said, and if it's really dry outside, then you might need to seriously increase the water. But you want it just enough so you can press it together, but not too much. Okay, so I'm going to take these, and these should form about 8 balls. You can do 8 to 12 if you want some tiny tortillas, which we sometimes do. I really like to put honey on mine. It's so good. My husband likes to put coconut oil and cinnamon. I'm not a big fan of like coconut oil on its own, but it's great. So anyways, I rolled this into a ball, and then I have some parchment paper here, 2 pieces, not very like large, pretty small because these are a little bit smaller. Now press down And then I'm going to squish the edges in, because you'll see in a second, it will probably start cracking, and I want to minimize this as much so that they're just kind of rounded edges there. Okay, then I'm going to take the second sheet of parchment and my rolling pin. I'm going to roll it forward just until I have a nice long line here. And then I'm going to shift it and roll it the other way in just really, really quick motions to get that as thin as I can. Okay, so here's why cassava flour is tricky to work with. Do you see how that cracked right there? It's okay, never fear, that's not a problem. All I'm gonna do is press it together and just go over it really softly. Now the edges are pretty crackly and I don't love looking at that. So I'm gonna take the rolling pin around the edges and shift the cassava flour as I go so that those edges end up being smoother, okay? It's not too time consuming, but I like it to look a little bit prettier. Okay, so this one's not perfect. They're never gonna be absolutely perfect. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and I'm gonna take this over to my hot pan that's already on the stove, and then I'm just gonna flip it into it. So normally, what I like to do is I like to flip this over into my hand and then carry it over to my hot pan and plop it in. So anyways, that's what it looks like. I'll get my cameraman back in here to help me out so you can actually see what's going on the stove. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna grab you guys and take you with me. Okay, so here is what it looks like on the stove. I'm gonna actually make you guys watch this so you can see what happens. Within a few seconds, there's going to be some air bubbles starting to form. And like I said, this is totally not perfect. Look at these like kind of cracky bits. You can also fix it once it gets on the hot pan if you're careful not to burn yourself, and just kind of squish it together. Okay, there are bubbles forming. Do you see those little bubbles? They almost look like the blisters. So you wait for those to form, or for the edges to kind of lift up like they have from the pan already. And this baby's already done. I got it on too hot. Okay, so it's literally seconds. You can't even leave it. I cook it on a medium-high heat so that it doesn't burn. A little bit lower is fine. You always want to preheat the pan. If you don't preheat the pan, then what's going to happen is you are going to end up with some sticky tortillas. Anyways, so that's the tortilla part. And now if I go back over and I try to squish this together, it might be a little dry, and I actually think it was a little too dry because it was already cracking when I was rolling it out. So I'm just going to make sure that I add more water to this, just a teaspoon at a time, not too much. I don't want it to be too sticky. But yeah, so that's it. That's how you make tortillas with cassava flour that are AIP and Paleo compliant. All right, so let's move on to the taco bowls. I have here, I've pre-made the dough already for the taco bowls because you need to use that same recipe: a cup of cassava, half a cup of salt, or half a teaspoon of salt. And then also you're going to use 3 tablespoons of olive oil and 7 tablespoons of water. Same exact recipes on my blog. And then you're going to split it in 2. This makes 2 large taco bowls. So I made this on the side, and I'm just going to work with it just a minute to feel out and see if it needs any water. And it does actually need some water. So I'm just going to pour a tiny bit in the bottom. Not a lot, not a lot. And then I'm just going to roll this in it to soak up that water. Again, too much water makes it too sticky, and you end up with it being cracked. So you can use like a pyrex bowl to bake on top of. You can turn that upside down to make these. You do have to make sure that your dough isn't too wet, that it's not too dry. Otherwise, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to get on there, and it might not come off. So when I made it on the back of a Pyrex bowl, it was perfect consistency, and I didn't encompass the whole bowl. I only went about a third of the way. So if you want to do it that way, that's fine. I prefer buying fluted taco shells, and these are like, I think I found them on Amazon for like $7 or something like that. They're non-stick, makes it really easy to put those in there. So again, I'm just gonna roll this out, but this is half of that tortilla recipe, so I'm gonna have more to work with than I did before. So I have bigger parchment paper. You see how that's nice and long there? I rolled it straight out, and then I'm gonna rotate it again. I've already got some cracking going on the edges, but that's okay because the edges will likely fall off when I put them inside the bowl. Anyways, okay, just roll this out to a good size. You don't want these too thin because they will break, and you don't want it too thick because otherwise they're gonna cook and they're just gonna be really crunchy and really hard. So these are baked taco bowls, they're not fried. So if you make them and you're like, oh, I don't love this, it's probably because they're not fried. You can buy a little fryer basket for these. I've seen some on Amazon as well. And then you can fry it in whatever you want to. Bacon fat or olive oil or something like that if you're AIP Paleo. Okay, so that's a little bit more work. Whew, that is a big sucker. So I'm just gonna go patch up any cracks here. And here comes the fun part and the scary part. Because this is deep, and honey, I can totally see you. Your butt. Anyways, pardon my husband who's apparently trying to sneak behind me. These are deep, so if I put it on top, what's actually gonna happen is the edges of this will cut this and then slide in. That means it makes it a little bit more shallow, goes about halfway, so I patch the rest. But you could just cook it halfway. You don't have to have the whole huge taco shell in there. Were you sneaking over there to eat the tortilla?
No, to move it.
To move it so it didn't burn? That would be awesome. Food blogger burns food on live demo. Okay, ready? Ready, set, go. Okay, totally cut it off. So now I'll just press it in. And I can either have a half taco shell, which this is about half a cup of cassava. So if you're looking at carbs or anything like that, then you might want to just go ahead and have this half shell. Or these pieces are so nicely severed that I can just lay them right back in and use gravity to do the work for me. So I'm just patching it right there. Now the picture that you see, that one was patched just a little bit, and it doesn't look bad at all. It just turned out perfectly fine. So anyways, I'm in here and can have the half shell, or I can go ahead and patch it to make that whole shell and just fix the edges. So these are super fun. We love them. They're really crunchy. They hold up really good with salad, which salad can kind of be a little bit wet and it might not be, you know, as great for some taco shells. It gets a little bit soggy. These don't get soggy. So we put olive oil in them, or we'll put in some lime. Just squirt some lime in there. If you've got any vinaigrettes, I have a cilantro vinaigrette recipe on my blog. That would be lovely in this. So, okay, so I'm almost done. If I want to patch it, I don't have to. But if I want the bigger bowl, I like ripping off the edges and then putting honey on them. It's so good. Okay, anyway, so I've got like these extras, and I'm just gonna throw those into the bowl for the second batch, and then I'm gonna bake this at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm gonna do that for about 20 minutes, between 15 and 20 minutes. So with the non-stick tortilla fluted shell bowls, it won't take probably more than 20 minutes. I also have to adjust for elevation. We're at about 5,000 feet here. So you've got to adjust up or down if you're at another extreme. But they should cook within that time frame. If you are using the back of a pyrex to cook them on, and I'll show you guys how to do that if you want to, then you need to make sure that you cook it for the amount of time that is put on there. Otherwise, you're going to end up with it sticking too much to the sides of the bowl. So I'm actually going to grab a pyrex bowl. Do we have a small one up there? Okay. Make sure that your pyrex says that it is oven safe. Mine says oven safe, not stovetop. Funny stories about that. I've broken many a pyrex setting it on a burner that I thought was off and cooled. So definitely not stovetop, but you can put it into the oven. So I'm just going to roll this set out. It's feeling a little bit dry, but that's okay because I really, really, really don't want it sticking to the pyrex at all. So dry is fine as long as I can get it on there without it crumbling. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you need to just play around with cassava flour because it's a mess. And if you haven't had any experience with it, your first few recipes are probably not going to turn out the way that you might want them to. So just make sure you're watching on that. Okay, so that's about as big as I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut it out around the edge of the pyrex bowl. You could throw it on top like I did with the fluted one, but I'd rather be exact to make sure that it works out. Now, you don't need to oil the pyrex because the cassava tortillas already have oil in them, so you don't need to oil the back of the pyrex dish if that's the way that you choose to bake these instead of in like a fluted tortilla bowl. Okay. There's also the option, if you'd rather not put it on the back, you can fold it into the inside. It just makes it a little bit harder to pull apart. I like being able to slide my finger under it or just slide a knife and easily get it off that way. So I'm actually going to use just the back of a pancake spatula to help lift this. This is another option with the tortillas too, if you want to lift them with something else. It is dry, so I don't want it to crack. I'm going to put my hand under there too. I'm just going to fold it over. Okay, you might see some cracking forming. That's okay. I'm just going to press it together. If you're creative, you could even make it look like it's fluted on the outside. I'll probably get to that point, but that's why I like cheating and using my fluted pans because they're a little bit easier. Try not to press it on too tight. Just press the dough together and make sure you've got a little bit of lift underneath the corners. Otherwise, it might be a little bit harder to take off. So just see how I've got a little bit of lift under there that I can pull this off with. Okay, and then I'm going to put this in the oven with the other one, and it'll only take 15 to 20 minutes for this to bake, and then you've got a tortilla bowl. Now, put that in there. That's all that I have for today with the tortillas. I'm going to go ahead and just log off in a second. If you guys don't have any questions at all, feel free to give me a shout out on my page if you do have questions, if this recipe isn't working quite the way you thought it would. And if you show me some pictures, I might be able to help you diagnose what the problems are on that. Or you can shoot me a message through my Facebook on Our Grain-Free Life. Check out my blog. As always, all my recipes are on there. So this one is on there, and I'll make sure I'll post this in the comments below. And thank you so much for joining me for our Sunday cooking demonstration. There will be more of these to come. Go ahead and comment and ask which one of my recipes you'd like to have me demonstrate, and then I will go ahead and do that. Thanks so much. Have a good day.